Alright, this lesson is going to be a little bit longer because I have a couple of things that I need to throw at you. We're going to focus mostly on positioning in this, but I'm going to show you a couple of other things that you can use in here as well. But before we get started on positioning, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce another HTML tag that we've not covered to this point, the div tag. It works a little bit like the span tag in that it's a container for content that you can then apply styles to, and the stuff inside the div inherits those styles. It's more for a group of content instead of just one or two words like the span tag does. It also has built-in white space. So if you were to put div tags in the middle of the paragraph, it would cause an automatic carriage return. So it's a little bit different than the span tag. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set up 3 different divs on our page. And it is just div. And it's an opening and closing, so everything that shows up between these 2 tags is considered to be inside that div. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put some content in this. I'm going to go ahead and put an image in. We're going to use Yosemite Smaller from a previous lesson. I'm going to hide, actually I'm not going to do that. I'll just go ahead and put our alt in. And I'm also going to put a paragraph in that allows us to give it a caption. This is in Yosemite Valley, and I'm going to close that p tag. So I have one div there that has a picture in it and a caption. I'm going to copy and paste this in and create 2 more divs and just change the content in them a little bit. So in the second div, I'm going to do Yosemite Smaller 1, which is a different image. This is outside Yosemite. And this last one, Yosemite Smaller 2, I think it's actually a picture I took when I was in Alaska, so we'll say, could be Alaska instead of Yosemite. Alright, so we have these 3 divs. I'm going to go ahead and save those and click on over to the browser, reload, and show what that does. It doesn't do anything really outstanding or different than we've seen before, but what it does now is it allows us to not only change the styles of these, but it's also going to allow us to position the divs, and then the stuff inside the div is going to move along with it. So let's go ahead and start working on the styles. I'm going to go ahead and assign each div to its own class, and then we'll go into the head section of the document and we'll define the properties that we're going to use for these divs. So I'm going to go ahead and just say this is going to be in class first. The next one's going to be in class second. And then the last one, as you might suspect, is going to be in class third. So we've assigned those to classes, and what we need to do now is go up here and actually define the styles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just quickly change the background color of these things so you can see a little bit more about what these divs really look like. I'm going to go ahead and stick with our bright primary colors. Background dash color is going to be yellow, and then let's do third, where our background dash color is going to be blue. Of course, we'd probably want to change the text on that last one because the black text on that blue background is going to be hard to read, but yeah, you can go back and review that in a different lesson. For now, we're going to go ahead and move forward and take a peek at these divs. So we reload this, and as you can see, it applies that. Notice that the div stretches all the way across the page. We have control over that. We can do that, and we can change the height and the width of these containers. And so let's go back and do that real quick. On the first div we have, I know that image is 200 pixels wide by 133 pixels tall. Now we do have to account for the text underneath that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set the height of this div to be, let's say about 175. And let's go ahead and change the width of this to be maybe 220. And I have a typo there. I need a colon. Now let me just show you before I do that on all of them what that does. I'm going to save that, go back to the browser and reload, and I have apparently made a typo. So let me go back real quick and see. Height 175 pixels, width 22 pixels. I meant to make that 220 pixels. Alright, so let me save that and reload now. And you can see that it kind of makes a little red square because that's filling in the background of a div that we set the dimensions of to be 175 by 220. So going back to the code, I'm going to just go ahead and do that for all three of our divs. I'm going to just copy and paste that in. So it gives us some little building blocks to work with. I'll show you what it looks like as we go along. So we have a red one, we have a blue one, and we have a yellow one. All right, so that allows us to set the dimensions. We can play along with those if we wanted a little bit more. And we will also be able to arrange the text and everything inside the div. I know that looks a little cattywampus right now, but we'll deal with that in another lesson. So let's talk about positioning now. We have the position property, and we have two values for it. We can absolute position something, or we can relatively position something. When we give absolute positioning directions, what the browser does is it comes to the upper left corner of the page, and almost like a treasure map, we'll tell it to go to the left X number of pixels, we'll come down X number of pixels, and X marks the spot. There's where the upper corner of our div will go. It is absolute because it is always from the same starting point. Now if we relative position something, what it's going to do is it's going to, again, kind of go from the top and the left, but it's going to go from the top and the left of where it normally should be in the document. So in this case, our first div is ending up on the left edge of this. Remember, the H1 has white space, so it automatically carriages return, so our div ends up there. So if we were to relatively position this div, what's going to happen is it's going to affect the flow of the page, and it will take the position of this element and move it left and down from this spot. And it'll also affect the rest of the content on the page because it will fall into that, back into the flow after the relative positioning ends. So let's take a look at that real quick and show you how it works with just one of our divs. Then we're going to absolutely position some of our other divs, and we can have some fun with those and stack those in different ways if we choose. So with our first one, let's go ahead and start with absolute positioning. We give it the property of position, and we give it the value of absolute. Now we also need to tell it how to do it or where to put it. So we're going to tell it to come down from the top 100 pixels, and we're going to tell it to come off the left margin about 200 pixels. Now you'll see it is very easy to overlap things because the browser is going to follow your directions and do exactly what you tell it to do. So when we save this and go back and reload this, I want you to notice a couple of things. Comes over, comes down, but notice everything else moves back up because this is taken completely out of the context of the HTML. It really at this point has little to no relationship to anything else on the page, so you can't even say that this div right here comes after this one because it has been taken out of the flow of the document. If we want to maintain the flow of the document, we would go back and we would change our positioning from absolute to relative. And you can see the difference when we change that and reload. We get a little bit of a different look. It comes over and down from here instead of over and down from here. So it's a little further down the page. And notice that the other elements have also kind of fallen back into place, and you can kind of say that this picture is after that picture. Alright, so let's go back to our code, and I want to go ahead, just to make this easier to understand, I'm going to change this back to absolute, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to position all three of these things real close to each other. So I'm going to position our second item. We're going to come down from the top maybe 50 more pixels. Actually, let's just come down to 30 more pixels, and we're going to go to the left 30 more pixels. And so I'm going to copy that same exact statement and do the same thing with our last div, but this time I'm going to add again 30 more pixels. It's just going to look kind of like a little cascading effect with these divs. Let me show you what I mean. I save that, I come here, and they're kind of stacked in a cascading because this one's positioned here, this one's positioned a little bit over and down, and then this one's positioned a little bit over and down. So notice the way these things overlap, the way these things stack is determined by when they're put into the HTML. This one's in the HTML first, so it's automatically going to be on the bottom. This one comes next, and then this one comes after that. If I want to change that stacking order, I can use another property called the z-index. And what the z-index allows me to do is play around with that stacking order. I can assign any value to a z-index as long as it's an integer. Most of the time they're assigned in levels of 10, multiples of 10. But the thing you need to know is the item with the lowest z-index will end up being on the bottom. So right now in our browser, the red div, which is our first div, is on the bottom. If we want to change that, I can come in here and assign z-index and give it a high number. Let's give it 30. And then let's put our second one with a value of 20, and our final one with a z-index of 10. And remember, the one with the lowest z-index is going to end up on the bottom. So it's actually going to reverse the stacking order. If we save it and go look at it, you can see that that's what it did. So you have not only a horizontal and vertical alignment, but now we have kind of a 3D effect, and we have to worry about the way these things stack on top of each other. Okay, so that's it for positioning. I do want to show you just a couple of other random things that you might want to include in your page. Again, when you're looking for styles, there is an appendix in the back of your book that includes most of the properties that you can change and what values go with them. And also I reference a really good tutorial in the learning modules on CSS that you might want to take a look at if you want to look at some more of these things. But just real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our code. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of all these divs and just show you a couple more things. I'm going to go ahead and do an unordered list. And I'm going to copy and paste just so you don't have to sit here and watch me do a whole lot of typing. Change this to 2 and change this to 3. And this will allow, what I'm going to do is show you just a couple styles that you can change on lists. If you want to change those bullets, you can change them to predefined styles. You can come in here on the list tag and change the style. If I can type, that would help. It's going to be equal to list style type, and we have a bunch of different options that you can choose from. You can choose from disk, circle, or square if it's an unordered list. If you do choose to go with an ordered list, you can choose decimal. You can have decimal leading 0, lower Roman, upper Roman, lower alpha, upper alpha, lower Greek, and lots of different ones that again are listed in the index of your book. But I'm just going to go ahead and change it. Normally you're going to see a black dot as the list bullet, but in this case I'm just going to change this to square and show you what that looks like. So let's go back here, reload our page, and there's our list with square bullets instead of the default circle. If I'm not happy with that, if I want to use an image instead, what I can do is I can go back to the code and tell it, instead of list style type, I can change it to image. And just like when we were doing backgrounds before, we have to tell it to go get an image. So we tell it we have to make a link to that image, and we do that using the word URL, I guess the abbreviation URL. And then in parentheses, because we're making a relative link to a file that's in the same folder, we'll go ahead and tell it the name of our bullet. And in this case, I think I have one named sunnybullet.gif. And close those parentheses and save that, and go back and you can reload. So there you can use an image for a bullet instead of one of the predefined bullets. Another option I want to show you right now is the cursor. And the cursor has different states. Because I don't have really anything but text and images on this page, my cursor is a pointy white arrow. If I were to have a link in this, let me add a link real quick. Notice what the cursor does when I change to a link. Let me reload. Notice when I move my cursor over that, it turns to the pointy finger. So there are different states of the cursor. If you want to change the cursor, you can. And you do that using the cursor style. So on the body tag, for example, I could come in here and say style equals cursor. And my options are going to be crosshair, pointer, move, text, weight, and help. And they're all tied to cursors that you're used to seeing. You probably just don't realize it. Like weight is going to be an hourglass. Text is going to be the little insert text line. Help is going to be a question mark. So let's just do one of those real quick to show you what it looks like. So I save that, and instead of a pointer, notice now I have the pointer with the little question mark that indicates the question mark. And so these will be useful. Some of the styles we're not going to get into yet, because when we get to programming, one of the things we can do with JavaScript is we can change these styles on the fly. So for example, there's a property named visibility where you can make things invisible on the page, and most people look at that and they're like, why would you ever want to make something invisible? Why would you put it on there at all? And the answer is we can actually use JavaScript to change things from invisible to visible based on what a user does. And so there will be a lot of properties that you'll see that we're not going to cover just yet. We might not ever get to them, but they are useful in their own way. So that ends this section. The last section on CSS is really going to be an example of bringing a lot of these different properties together to make a really kind of a cool layout. So we'll see you in the next lesson.